Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first California MBA Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion webinar. I am Susan Milazzo. I run the California MBA, and I'm grateful that you joined us today. We started this committee in 2021, and really with the goal of providing resources for our companies within the real estate finance industry to either develop or enhance their DE&I programs within their own companies, and also to provide resources about how they're reaching out to their customer base with an eye to making sure that they are including diversity, equity, and inclusion in their outreach to potential customers. So we're very excited to be launching out our webinar series with today's presentation. And if you are a member of the California MBA and would like to participate in this committee, you can get in touch with me, susan@cmba.com. I'd be happy to add you to the committee so you can help us with our future outreach. We have an educational subcommittee, which are providing the content for webinars such as you'll see today. We also have an outreach subcommittee that is reaching out to other nonprofits, as well as colleges and universities, community colleges, so that we can introduce the real estate finance industry to a wide range of people who might be interested in this as a career path. I want to note that we've also launched a committee page for these resources on our website, and I posted that link in the chat function. So if you'd like to check that out, we will be populating that with more information as we get it. Lastly, I would encourage all of you to be thinking about topics that you would like to hear content on relative to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the future, and we will be take that into consideration and try to accommodate that in future presentations. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ian Rambarran, who's a shareholder at Klinedinst law firm, a great supporter of the California MBA, been very active with us on a number of our initiatives, and is our chair for the DE&I committee. So Ian, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Susan. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. It's an honor to be part of this committee, as it is for any committee with the CMBA. So thank you, Susan, for allowing me to do that. As you'll see over the next year or more, our committee is comprised of dynamic and impressive professionals. We have members from the lending, servicing, compliance, and real estate industry, all willing to contribute to the committee and contribute to the goals that Susan just said. As Susan mentioned, we split the committees into an educational component and an outreach component. And we're developing ideas and taking ideas as we progress through our journey here. And if you have information that you'd like to share with us or ideas that you'd like to share, then we want them. Today, you'll hear from our educational subcommittee, and Linn Cook, who took the lead on today's presentation, is the Vice President of Sales at OptifiNow and has been involved in the mortgage technology industry for the past 20 years. And Linn has also been a member of the CMBA for over the past 10 years. We appreciate his tireless efforts in putting this program together with the rest of his committee. And with that, Linn, would you take over?
Thank you so much, Ian. Thanks, Susan. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I mean, we're really excited to be able to give this presentation to you. This is something that all four of us, and certainly the CMBA in general, feels very passionate about. And so what we really want to do is talk about this concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion in a context of a conversation more than anything else, right? We're not trying to come out and have a preach or do some type of an education session. I think all of us are professionals and are adults. We understand sort of, these concepts around DE&I, but we want to kind of have a conversation that helps you sharpen and focus your sensitivity and your understanding of DE&I and put it within a context of the mortgage industry. Now, what we would like to do first actually is, we actually want to give a little poll first, right, to everyone that's attending the presentation right now. Let's set a poll that kind of level sets for everyone. Where are you or your organization at in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So as you can see on the screen, we're asking you, what do you think, as far as you know, what level of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, has your organization implemented? Okay, and as you can see, it's kind of a sliding scale. Either it's inactive, you don't have any DEI, sliding up to reactive, proactive, progressive, or best practice. Now, I know that we haven't really given you very strong definitions of what each of these different terms mean, but if you could do your best, right, and give us some sense of where you feel that your organization may be in regards to DEI. And so we're going to allow this poll to be up for the next several minutes to collect the results. But in the meantime, before I introduce everybody, I do want to make just a very quick comment. And make note that, look, the mortgage industry has been a very interesting study, an extreme dichotomy over the past 15 months. We've seen that it has experienced very high highs and very low lows as a result of the calamity that has gripped this nation and the world around it. The COVID pandemic, Black Lives Matter protests, an extremely polarizing presidential election, and quite frankly, I could go on and on. And yet, the mortgage industry itself surged like never before, creating an enormous amount of profit for lenders, vendors, investors, and everyone else up and down the lending food chain. So the purpose of today's conversation is to really highlight an important subject that encompasses both the business and human aspects of this industry that we all work in. And quite frankly, we feel that this subject really needs to be discussed more and more. So officially, it is known as diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI for short. Our conversation today looks at why it's important for us to acknowledge that being different and unique as an individual is a good thing, and how embracing these differences translates into stronger, more resilient, and financially healthy companies and communities. So this is just the first in a series of webinars that the California Mortgage Bankers Association will produce over the next coming months, and we hope that you will stay engaged with us and possibly even join us in this effort. So we will be providing you with additional information on how to join the California MBA and how to join the California MBA's effort towards DEI. Okay, so thank you for filling out that poll. So joining us in our conversation today, okay, I would like to introduce you to Genail Nemovi. Okay, so I just want everyone to know a little bit of background about Genail. She is born and raised in Southern California. If I could get the slide to work, 1 second. She is born and raised in Southern California. She is a closet TikTok dancer. And as someone who is the parent of a 3-year-old, she is very, very familiar with Disney and all things cartoony. Okay, thank you for joining us today, Genail.
Thank you.
Oh, and I must add that she is an attorney. She has a JD and she does practice law over the past 16 years in the mortgage industry. Also joining us is Michael Guidotti. Okay, he is the vice president at American Pacific Mortgage. Oh, thank you. There you go. He is the vice president of branch technology integration. Born in Barstow, California, on the Fort Irwin military base. He lived in Germany until he was 5 years old. And then he's been in Sacramento, California ever since. And as you can see, Michael is a very competitive guy and very equitable guy too, because whenever there are arguments in his office or in his family, he uses board games and card games to resolve them. Nothing more fair than that, right, Michael?
Right. Thanks for having me.
Now myself, yes, my name is Linn Cook. I am Vice President of Sales at OptifiNow. Myself, I was originally born in Chicago, Illinois. I lived, until I was about 12 years old in Madison, Wisconsin. And then I moved out here to Irvine, California, and I've actually been living here ever since. I am a huge sports fan. I am a huge LA sports fan. And I am so huge that I was able to convince all my daughters and my wife to become Dodger and Kings fans. So that shows you how much influence I have over my family. And then our most distinguished presenter is Mbiya. Okay, she is the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion at Flagstar Bank. Okay, so obviously she is going to help guide us through this whole conversation. Now, she was originally born in Zambia, Africa. She got her undergrad and her MBA in the United Kingdom. And in addition to leading diversity and inclusion at Flagstar Bank, she is a movie producer. Right, and she is working on that. very interesting project on a very famous musician that she will not tell us who it is, but I'm sure at one point we'll find out when it debuts. Right, Mary?
You will.
Terrific. So to get started on this, I think, we do want to have just a sort of basic introduction as to what diversity and inclusion really is. But when we talked about this webinar, to you, it was really more important for us to talk about what diversity, equity, and inclusion is not. So can you explain that a little bit for us, Mary?
Sure, but thanks for having me, and I'm so glad to be on the panel with all of you, because this is really fun. I just think the conversation is going to be great for people to understand. But anyways, I love that we're starting with the differences between the EEOC, which stands for Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and affirmative action, because a lot of times people use them they interchange and think that that's what diversity and inclusion is all about. So to level set, we're going to clarify that and say affirmative action is all about prevention and correcting discriminatory practices and historical patterns that have happened. Whereas when you look at diversity and inclusion, it's all about valuing all of our differences. And whereas the other one is a legally driven mandate, diversity and inclusion is all voluntary. So nobody's forcing anyone to do anything at this point, but it's a proactive process of change that we all voluntarily, the companies that participate in it have all voluntarily at this point been participating and have made the decision to take the path of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then EEOC and affirmative action, it benefits protected classes, whereas diversity and inclusion includes and positively affects everyone. Even the groups that sometimes feel like they're left out, it actually does benefit them to certain degrees. I mean, once they look at it and really understand diversity and inclusion and the process and like all of the things that are in place, I love that we're able to talk about this, because then people might gain some understanding, in which case they'll understand that they are fully included. And then when you look at the different demographic characteristics that are included in affirmative action, like sex, age, race, ethnicity, disability, when you look at diversity and inclusion, it includes a wider range of attributes, which include cultural style, functional backgrounds, cognitive styles even. And so we can all benefit from this. And then later on, we'll talk about the dimensions of diversity. But just knowing this really helps. And then for me, my favorite part is the fact that I'm a finance major. And so I came in from a world where you had to make sure that whatever you were doing was having some sort of ROI and the return on investment, and also that it was matching up to the strategy of the organization. And so when you look at affirmative action, it's unrelated to an organization's business goal or strategic plan. Whereas diversity and inclusion, it's an integral part of an organization's business goals and strategic plan. So that could be a pathway when it comes to affirmative action, but when you're talking about true diversity and inclusion, it's part and parcel. And once you integrate it, and once it's not an island on its own, you will quickly see the benefits, and people get to understand and they get to own it and actually implement it into who you are as a business and how you do business. So I'm glad that we were able to level set this so that we can have a true conversation where everybody's on the same page when we're talking about diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, and I think that this is very important, right? And there's some aspect of it that's a little bit troubling. I mean, Michael, why do you think that we need to make this distinction up front? I mean, what is it that we're trying to get across or what is it saying about DEI when we're saying, hey, you got to make sure you understand the difference between affirmative action and DEI?
Yeah, I think Mary hit it on the head when she was just going through the definitions of the mandate versus kind of the effort. Mandate, it's the box checking. Yes, you did this, but I feel like with the diversity and inclusion, it's the effort that you're putting in to understand the evolution, how it's an evolving process. There's groups that are included in diversity and inclusion, as Mary mentioned, that aren't even factored into affirmative action. So I think it's just having that cognizant mindset of, putting the effort out to really understand people's, differences understand, the value that everybody brings, and really focusing on that to make sure that people feel included in what you're doing, whether it's at a personal level or a company level.
So Genail, I mean, hearing that, do you think that there are a significant number of people out there that have this misperception of DEI, are mixing, and confusing, or have misperceptions that are confusing with affirmative action that make them want to push back on this whole DEI effort?
Well, I definitely think so, and I think that anyone that was around during the 60s and had to implement the affirmative action laws probably have strong feelings about DEI, and it's like, here we go again, right? But the difference here is has been stressed already, is that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a part of it's not a legal mandate. It's a part of a company's strategic plan, right? It's an embracing of diversity, equity, inclusion as a strategy for success for the company, and so because of that, you're going to see that there's a lot of benefit that a company will see a lot of benefit from addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion within their organization, and it is something that they have to work on. Yes.
Okay, well, that's great. So now that we understand this, Mary, right, we're saying, look, this is not affirmative action. We are talking about something entirely different, something that is very voluntary, and quite frankly, I mean, it's very friendly, right? That's what we're trying to say. This is a friendly approach to understanding other people and trying to, solve this sticky issue that we have, that we know is hanging over. So can you kind of describe in more detail, what diversity, equity, and inclusion actually means in this context?
So thank you, Lynn. And so when you look at the full picture, right, diversity quite simply is a mix of people. So it's people coming in from different places with different backgrounds, different experiences, and having some sort of things that have shaped who they are and how they contribute to whatever they're doing. And so, or how they come across. And so when you look at that mix of people, right, and then these people have different perspectives and they look different, but you have to get to know who they are in order to really identify and know who they are. You can't just judge them from how they appear. So diversity is the full range of the mix of people. And then on the other hand, equity is what is in the policies, the practices, the position that we take. And so with that, it's a choice. A company has to put all of those elements into place and decide what kind of things they're going to have in place in order to ensure, for example, that they have all of these things that will help protect whoever is working within their organization, to ensure that there is dignity, that there is respect for people that are different or have different perspectives, and also to make sure that it's a safe space, right? And so, and then when you look at inclusion on the other hand is action. It's all about the action piece of it, of what you're doing via the voice that's given to people, the power, and organizational culture. So all in all, when we implement all of these practices, then you will find that the impact is going to be that belonging piece, where a person feels like they belong and they can thrive within the environment, even though they're different. And their voice can be heard, even though they're coming in with a different perspective. And I think it's really important to understand those concepts, because then it helps us realize why it's important to actually have those in place. And the organizations can define what diversity is going to mean to them, what equity is going to mean to them. Because when you're talking about fairness, when it comes to equity and where people are starting out and the levels at which they're starting, you have to define what that is. A word, even though you might say fair, what does fair mean to your company? Define it, right? And then inclusion, what does inclusion mean for your company? So at Flagstar Bank, we've been able to really take the time to define each one of these. And for us, diversity is all of those things that make us different.
It's interesting. I mean, understanding these concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it almost feels like, well, these are concepts that we've been taught ever since we're Genail's daughter's age, right? All the movies that we've seen are telling us that we must be diverse and have equity and inclusion. And yet, it is a very hot topic. We're still talking about this as adults in 2021. Michael, I mean, why do you think that, diversity, equity, and inclusion is still a big deal, right, in 2021, right? Why does it need to be addressed specifically in the mortgage lending industry or the finance industry in general?
Yeah, I think, a couple pieces to it is, one, I think you're seeing more, just the access to information, the visibility of things that have been going on, some of what we've touched on already, just things that have gone on in society over the last 2 years that really have it, front and center more than, maybe ever before or since the 60s, as Genail had mentioned. So I think just the access to the information and that people are seeing it so much. And I think from the lending aspect of it is, when people talk about life events, right? You talk about the birth of your child, you talk about getting married, and people talk about buying their first home. So, knowing that they have that access, knowing, that are you, as a company, are you representing the communities that you're serving and that you're lending in? Does your employee base match the demographics or the variations of what that market that you're trying to empower people with home ownership? So I think that's where it really ties into, the importance right now, at least as a, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can, there's definitely that aspect, and we'll get into sort of more of the corporate or the profit-based aspect, of diversity. But it's interesting that you're saying, basically you're saying, look, this 2021 is very different than 1960s or the 1970s, 1980s. I mean, there has been some sort of a evolution and awareness, and not to say that it's always progressed positively, right? Yeah. It's expanded, right? And there's greater visibility, of people who are in the minority, right, to a certain extent. So Genail, I mean, when you look at that and you consider, what is the state of California specifically, right? Because, selfishly, we are the California Mbiya. Most of our members, are based here in California. What do you notice that's different about California and the way that we approach, DE&I versus maybe other parts of the country? And should DE&I be approached differently based on where the state of your environment is? Does that make sense?
That's a great question, Linn. And I would just start by saying that just overall, I think that if I can just emulate what Michael just mentioned about having the focus on having so much data at our access, and we have a lot of millennials, right, that just use the data, and they're using the data in terms of making buying decisions where they want to buy. They're using the data in terms of where they want to work, right? And they're being very discriminatory on where the places that they feel comfortable at working. And I know that coming up, it's like you're looking at the job. Back then we were focused on the job, not so much as what they stood for, but what the job was, and if we wanted to be in that job. And now it's evolved to a point where they're being much more discriminatory on where they work. And I think companies have to focus on that, right? Where they're working, where they're spending their dollars, who they're marketing to. And so when we look at California, we say, okay, well, California has always been progressive in terms of how they live their lives, how we view ourselves as an industry in California overall. That California's been a bit progressive. I think Governor Newsom said it best when he said, we're not diverse, or we're not good because of our diversity, or we're not good in spite of our diversity, but we're good because of our diversity. And me being Southern California, born and raised, that's all I've ever seen. And it's you can tell the difference between our approach. In food, right? That's probably the best way to see it is in food. We have so much variety, and I know so much about people because of food, right? So we had that at our disposal. So I think in terms of, and because of that, we have a very booming economy in California, right? We're the most diverse, and our GDP is the highest. So there's a lot of benefits that can be seen from that, and I think that that corporations can take note of that and embrace that and emulate that and trying to get ahead within California and then in other states as well.
No, I agree. I mean, I think there is, something different about the way that we as Californians approach not diversity specifically, but approach each other, right? I mean, we have to live in proximity with large groups of people that quite frankly other states do not have, right? And so I think there has been somewhat of a unique approach that we've had towards diversity and equity and inclusion. And I think it does, to a certain extent, serve as a model for other states or the rest of the nation. But then again, I don't want to tout California too much, because I know people love to just bag on California, right? So let's narrow it down. Let's talk about, this is something I really love that Mary brings up. She talks about this concept of dimensions of diversity. Can you explain that a little bit more for us, Mary?
Sure. So there's so many different elements, right, of diversity. First of all, it's the ones that I see are the things that you see about us. And then there are the unseen things, right? The things that are really invisible. And until you speak or get to, you really don't know about some of those dimensions. And so there's the primary dimensions, which are usually difficult to change. So you're looking at ethnicity, sexual orientation, age and generation, and then physical and mental ability, gender, race, and then difficult to change. Then you go outside into the secondary elements. So we talk about the marital status and the language, the accents, the social style, the nationality, appearance, location, hobbies, educational background, and religion. And I usually, when I'm talking about this, I'll usually say, guess what? When I moved to the US, actually all of this changed for me. I was married, I got divorced, I had, more of an African, probably or British mix, because I was in England for so long. And now that I've been here the longest, over 20 years, guess what? My accent has changed. And then when I look at my social style, my nationality, I'm now a dual citizen, and appearance, location, hobbies, like all of this has gone into the mix, trying to stereotype me or put me in a box. They would really get it wrong. Mm-hmm. And so really getting to know who Mary is might take a little bit of time or a little bit of intentional, deliberate action, but it will probably go a long way in knowing who Mary is. And then just to add in and make it a little bit more complex, then you've got the cultural element. How we all communicate is going to be different. And if you're a manager or a leader, understand how people want to be communicated with. So you're taking a little bit of time, again, to get to know that. Individualistic or group-oriented. You might be having all of these group meetings, and sometimes it might be really critical for somebody to have a one-on-one with you as a leader. And then the importance of task to relationship, how decisions are made, how time is measured, how power is displayed, how we send messages, how we interpret the rules. That cultural element, in order for us to be culturally competent, we're going to need to take the time to really understand what's going on with different people within our midst. Now you can say, oh, I've got all of these people that I manage. At least make an effort for each layer to kind of know who they're working with, or even for peers to know each other, because that will go a long way. And when we talk about belonging, that impact of diversity, equity, and inclusion, this is where all of those things make a difference. And all we see at the core of who someone is the personality. Making quick judgments about people, whether it's customers on the external piece or internally within our organizations, we will get it wrong when we make quick judgments. And so we need to take the time to really get to know each other. And sometimes a lot of the cultural awareness that we have within our organizations, or just spending time with people, it's not enough to just say, oh, I know this person, I've got a friend, but you've never truly spent the time to get to know them. It makes a huge difference when you know somebody, know them, and when you just know them from the surface.
Mary, if I could just make a comment too, I always get it wrong, right? Like you can't help but to have these preconceived notions and have those, to come out when you're trying to figure out who someone is. But then you just have to ask the question, and you immediately, I see that I'm wrong. And knowing that, my preconceived notion is to know that I'm wrong, right? So I do take the time to get to know people.
And that's good. And then there are times when you find out that somebody, all this time, somebody on your team, you didn't even know they were colorblind. So all these charts for so long that you have prepared that were the best of charts, guess what? They couldn't even see, and they didn't say it to you because it never came up as a conversation. So when you want to see people thrive, when you go back to the basics of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's all of these beautiful things that you're going to find out about people, and you will help them thrive.
Yeah,
that comes across Oh, sorry, Lynn. I was just gonna say that, and that cuts across. It's not just internal inside of a company. That's in life, period. So this is like a lesson in how to be better in life as well as better in business. So.
And that is so true, Genail. And I always say, for what I wanted to ensure that we did at work was the fact that we needed to have that ripple effect. And the ripple effect is that you take this information that you learn at work, but you take it to your families. Your families then take it into your community. Your community then takes it into the state, right? And then the state takes it into the nation, and then the nation takes it into global. And so one core, and that's why the foundation of DEI, I think, really starting from the core of what it is really going to help us see progress along the way than when we do microwavable solutions.
Right. Yeah, I like that. I mean, I want to move on beyond, just this dimension of diversity. I mean, it's good that we understand that we are all layered, and that, if you take the time, are intentional, right, to get to know someone, you'll be surprised. But, this concept of, basically, I mean, let's call it what it is. I mean, really, this concept of unconscious bias. Can you help us understand how unconscious bias, is also at the core, right, of diversity and awareness? Tell us how this works in our brains and how it works in terms of our relations with other people.
Okay, so the news here, kind of like aha moment, it's just knowing that if you have a brain and it's functioning, guess what? You have biases. And so biases are not bad things. So let's just start from there. So level setting, again, we want to ensure that as we go along and talk about these things, that we're all talking about the same things. So at any given moment, we have 11 million pieces of information going through our heads. And yet, guess what? We can only process about 40 to 50 pieces of information. And those are the only ones that are absorbed, and then we take it out, and then we react to whatever needs to be done. We make decisions. So think about it. 11 million, it's like a mini computer. It's going all the time. And there's certain things that we can do to make sure that we're being conscious in our decision making. But really, honestly, understanding the fact that we have so much information coming at us, and we're only able to process and absorb 40 pieces is really like a telling moment, right? And for us to get to understand it. And so when you look at that, we're making very quick decisions as we go along in our process. And it's kind of like a reflex action. Something happens, we react, and then we move on. Now, I'm always conscious in saying, don't just talk about the unconscious bias element, but talk about the conscious element. These are times when people use the bias that they have to consciously impact others. And usually it's in a negative format, right? So that's for another day, but I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that, because I don't like to speak about unconscious bias without talking about the conscious element of it too. So when we talk about unconscious bias, again, going back, reflex action, it happens automatically without awareness. And so that's why we have to take a time out sometimes and think about it and then make a decision. And then also there's the part that unconscious bias leads to quick judgment for people and situations. So if we see someone, we might say, oh, stereotype, let me use that because this is how I was raised. And so again, that's where all of those things, when we talk about those dimensions, our experiences and backgrounds sometimes will come into play here. But when we are open and we expand ourselves into awareness, getting to truly know someone, kind of thinking about objectively, what am I trying to do? And have I taken the time to kind of clarify that? That's what will help us kind of make a good quality decision. And then just remember, all of this is being shaped with your background and experience. So taking the time to unlearn some of the things that were just stories we kind of learned is going to take a little bit of time, and be gracious about it. I mean, don't be quick to kind of like be so critical on yourself. It's okay. We're all learning together. I'm learning all the time. And I think that humility and the courage to be able to even make decisions sometimes, but have people around you that will help educate you, and be curious about people. That's going to really help you along the way. But if you're closed-minded, it gets a little bit more tricky, especially in the world that we're in today. And like Genail said, the upcoming generations, especially Generation Z, I mean, they truly will challenge the process, and they're very transparent about these conversations, which is good. So we need to catch up with the time, and we need to be aware. I'm learning all the time from my 16-year-old son, and it's a different world. They've got a lot of access to information. And so really ensuring that we're having this dialogue and educating ourselves is going to go a long way than learning from a mistake that we make that is then publicized, which may negatively impact our organizations and also negatively impact us as well. So let's make ourselves more aware of what's going on.
Okay, so I mean, I love that concept of what you said in the beginning. Look, bias is natural. We should accept that we have biases, right? Yep. But I mean, does this concept of unconscious bias, does it give people sort of free pass for, you know, behavior that might be inappropriate or behavior that people unknowingly or knowingly, right? Because, you know, Mary said it's conscious too. Does it give them a free pass to behave the way that they do? I mean, what do you think, Michael, that is the best way to kind of manage that situation?
Yeah, and I think, you know, it can depend on the situation and the interaction that you're having with that person. Because I think, you know, Mary there's a key word that she used there, and it was the humility. And I think it's when you acknowledge that somebody maybe has an unconscious bias, you know, you can judge them for it, you can be offended, or you can take that time to have the humility to really understand, you know, what's happened in their life, what's happened that may have caused that unconscious bias or conscious bias for that matter, and have a conversation, you know, be vulnerable. I think that is one of the things that is so difficult for a lot of us is that vulnerability with somebody that may say something that, you know, hits you the wrong way, or you're like, ooh, do they realize what that means to me? You know, and I think then, you know, allowing yourself to be vulnerable to educate them on, like, you know, hey, you know, what caused you to say something like that? Or, you know, I heard you say this. And I think then that's where you can really create that safe space and, you know, really educate one another and learn, like, okay, this is how this person was brought up. And so that's where their unconscious bias was coming from. Now, let me guess, I can educate them. And then now let's see if that maybe changes the way that they say things going forward, now that it's been brought to the front of their, you know, their consciousness. And now it's been, you know, talked about, but in a safe space.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I think that the concept of vulnerability, right? You know, this concept of humility, right? But you know, Genail, I mean, looking at, quite frankly, today's environment, I mean, you know, we see a lot of polarization, right? I mean, is that you know, people's lacking of recognition of their unconscious bias, or are they actually conscious of it and pushing it back against it, right? Because they maybe don't have the humility, or they don't want to have that sort of, you know, vulnerability.
Not only that, Linn, but I think what a lot of it has to do with is discomfort, right? There is change and growth that comes from discomfort. People need to get a little bit more comfortable with being uncomfortable. We have to have that. You know, it just with anything in life, you know, we have to try to open our minds and be willing to make the change. And when we talk about unconscious bias, you know, that's an internal look at the organization and internal look within ourselves, like, right? If we're putting it in a business context, that's what we have to do. And that, to me, is one of the fundamental pieces of starting any type of DEI program at a company. Is you have to attack that. You have to level set and know where your company is, right? You got to know where on the spectrum your company's culture is when it comes to unconscious bias. And, you know, do you have anything in place to address unconscious bias or microaggressions, or, you know, what are you doing to actually attack those things and flesh them out and then try to solve for them, right? So I really think that is part of growth that needs to happen, and it's a fundamental part of the growth that needs to happen.
And one thing that we, you know, adopted here at American Pacific Mortgage that I've seen a huge change in how we even are being, you know, taught to discuss things with one another is going away from the golden rule, you know, which is treat others how you want to be treated, and moving towards the platinum rule, which is treat others how they want to be treated, which comes with that effort and understanding and vulnerability to really understand who they are and how they like to be talked to, because everybody is so different.
Michael,
Yeah.
so I just want to speak to that because we actually upped that one and we've adopted a concept, right? Because think about it. Treat them the way they want to be treated. Do we know enough about that person to treat them the way they want to be treated? But what about if we thought about, and this is Dr. Lee, I've got to quote, right? Dr. Lisa Ikola, we brought her over to the bank to speak, and she said, how about if you treated people better than they thought they could ever be treated? How about that? Now that is like, oh, okay, let's treat them better than they even thought they could ever be treated. And when you do that, it actually takes it up a notch, and that's what we adopted as the Flagstar Rule.
I had to write that one down, Mary.
Yeah.
Yes, everyone should. I mean, that is a beautiful rule. I mean, why not? Why wouldn't you want to be the best version of yourself, right? Why wouldn't you want to treat people as well as you could possibly treat them, right? And yes, I mean, does it take effort? Sure, it takes effort, but isn't it worth that effort? I guess that's the question, you know, we end up asking ourselves on, in terms of how do you manage this unconscious bias? Because it's a two-way street, right? There's someone that has the bias, and there's someone that's recognizing the bias. Mary, isn't that responsible on both sides, right?
Right, because we're constantly, and I love this idea that I can't remember who said this, but you know, you get to overhear and underhear people depending on what your biases are. So if you go in and really make it, I mean, you become intentional in hearing people, really hearing people, not underhearing them and thinking you know what they meant, but really hearing them. You will be able to hear the different perspectives that people have and acknowledge when they've, you know, because sometimes we might not see it in that way, but once we hear people and gain understanding, we can be so innovative than we've ever been, but we've got to hear them. But if we think that we can only hear, because we will be intentional, like if we use our biases, we will help a certain kind of people, we'll overhear certain kind of people. But when we are intentional in elevating who we underhear, a change will happen.
That's great. So let's talk more in terms of sort of this corporate environment, right? I mean, we are all business people essentially, right? We're working in a finance world, we're working in the mortgage lending world. Genail, take us through this process of why is it worthwhile from a nuts and bolts perspective to invest in DEI?
Yeah, so your stats show it here, Lynn. When we have 19% of diverse companies, they have higher revenues, they have higher cash flows of 2.3 times what a non-diverse company would, and then they also have they're 70% more likely to capture new markets. I mean, I think that everyone would agree that if you're in business to make money, and this, you know, if you see a strategy that works across the board, why wouldn't you implement it?
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, and I worry, to be honest, Genail, that, you know, maybe, you know, some of these things are kind of cherry picking the data, right, to kind of make the data look good for companies that invest in diversity. But, you know, Michael, I mean, there's more stats beyond that, right, that, you know, says, look, it's just a smart strategy to invest in DEI, right?
Yep. Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's just looking at this and just to see where things are trending, you know, and even put the slide aside for a quick second, is just in our individual industries or businesses, you know, what have you seen change as it relates to diversity and demographics over the last 20 years? You know, just as far as the people that you see walking down your hallways, the people that you're interacting with on your, you know, your WebEx calls over the last year when we haven't been maybe shaking hands as much as we usually do. And then think of what's that trajectory going? Do you think it's going to go backwards, or do we think that it's just going to shoot forward over the next, you know, 15, 20, 30 years? And I think we all know what that is. You know, we're talking about, you know, there's really not going to be a majority demographic by 2050. And you say that out loud and it's like that, you know, there are certain things where you're like, maybe, maybe not. But to me, in my head, I'm like, Absolutely. Like, I don't see that there's going to be a majority demographic in 2050. You know, in the next few years, 75% of the workforce is going to be made up of, you know, millennials. You know, and what have we said? You know, now we're going into the Generation Z, but, you know, prior to that, it was like millennials were the most diverse group that we've ever had. And 75% of them are going to be what our workforce is made up of. So how important is that then to have, you know, your diversity, equity, and inclusion, you know, dialed in as it relates to your company? And then, you know, going into the home buyers, you know, 200 billion in buying power right now amongst those millennials. So what would that mean towards your business? Even a small percentage of those people, you know, buying homes through your lending company could potentially, you know, really change, you know, your cash flow, you know, some of the things that Genail just talked about on, you know, the previous slide. So I think when you really put the statistics and, you know, the numbers behind it, it just shows how powerful that really is.
Yeah, I mean, and Mary, like Genail said in the beginning, which is really, really salient. I mean, she's saying, look, younger people today have access to more information and data than anyone ever did before. And she's absolutely right. I mean, when I was looking for a job, I wasn't looking at demographic information. I was just looking at, you know, how much would they pay me, right? You know, it seems like younger people today, millennials, have enough information to really know exactly where they want to work, and you know, that's going to trend towards people wanting to work at diverse companies. I mean, are you seeing that as true at Flagstar as well?
Yes. And you know what? Usually when I'm speaking to leaders and asking them, like in terms of people that are managing, and asking them about some of the questions that they're being asked during the recruiting process, you know, people are asking about the culture of the organization, and they want to hear examples, because they don't want to come to a culture that they just saw with pictures, right? But they want to know what the company is actually doing. And I used to trade before, and I know that even like with stakeholders, like shareholders, they want to know. Some of them are, you know, want to only invest in socially responsible companies. So all of this, when we really look at the bigger picture, we see it in the way the interview process is going right now, and we see it just based off conversations. And so we actually start our DEI process from even recruiting phase. And when they're onboarding, we tell them about DEI. And once they're in, we actually tell them about DEI. So throughout their lifespan within Flagstar, they really need to know about DEI. And it's got to be consistent, not just, you know, a one-time conversation and then it's gone. So yes, we really see it a lot at Flagstar.
So that's interesting, right? So now when we're talking about, you know, the rubber hitting the road in terms of, you know, we've got these concepts of DEI, you know, how do we actually, you know, get that implementation of DEI that's going to make a difference in terms of the way that people are hired, right? The way that promotions are handed out, the way that you're able to communicate with your customer base. Talk to us a little bit more about, you know, the importance of, you know, inclusive leadership. You know, why is it so important that we have leadership that's fully vested in DEI?
So when you listen to everything that we said today, right? So you know what the business case is. There's so much research that's been done that shows that DEI is the best way to go. Not just the right way to go, you know, the right thing to do, but it's the best thing. And so when you look at it, you need to have inclusive leaders, because if you don't have inclusive leaders, they won't implement any part of this process. And then it's hard to really get people that came in because of that culture, and then they find out that their voices are not heard. They don't have representation, and they've got all of these things that are going on that they can't really speak out about. And so employees won't thrive in that kind of environment. And if you want to see those numbers that we talked about, productivity, engagement, and profitability, all in all, we have to have that in place. And what does that look like? So inclusive leaders are aware of their personal biases. And guess what? They're committed to fairness, and they know what fairness means, because it's not just one-sided. It's what does it look like for the other person? You know, perception and reality, right? They have to match up. So, and then they're curious about others. So they are learning, they're constantly learning about others. And even when they thought they had arrived at getting to know somebody, something changes. So you've got to have ongoing conversations. And ongoing relationships. And these are the things that make it a little complicated. And it's not just a journey that you get to a destination for, but it's an ongoing journey. And then you have to demonstrate humility. And with this one, I also add courage, right? You need to demonstrate humility and courage, because there are times when it's going to be difficult and you want to give up. I've fallen a lot of times. You have to get up and keep going. And it's okay to give yourself grace and know that you can do better the next time, and you get to learn and you get to apologize and just grab yourself up and keep going. And then it's holding yourself accountable and also holding your team accountable. Unfortunately, you have to ensure that people are not just bystanders of the culture. They need to be upstanders as well. So it's okay for them to be outspoken about things that they see or they think are happening. And so it takes time to kind of build that kind of like safe space where people will be able to be free to kind of share what their views are, right? Even when you think you're doing the best thing, there's always room for improvement. And so it's okay to be accountable to both yourself and then to others as well. And then encourage collaboration, because that all in all, the collaboration, and I'm talking about even within diversity within the roles that we're in, diversity between the departments, understanding what that other department needs that information for, and doing the best that you can to deliver that information so that they're getting the best information that they need for their work. Better than what they expected from you is going to be key to that process. So diversity is very complex, and once you do it well, it just is, the beauty of it has no limitations, and the results that we get out of it are going to be better than we even thought were possible.
That's great. I mean, obviously, we as individuals, we want to aspire to all these qualities, right? And so, making sure that your leaders, are aspiring to those qualities is important. I mean, Genail, from your standpoint, obviously you're a business leader, right? You have influence over people that work underneath you. I mean, in practice, how has that sort of, played out for you? You seek and you exhibit these sort of behaviors of inclusive leadership and being aware of inclusion, right? How does that impact the people or the staff that work underneath you? How have you seen that sort of roll out or trickle down to the rest of your organization?
Well, I think they embrace that. They appreciate it. They appreciate that you're at least trying to respond to their needs and paying attention to it. Again, for me, it's like it's part of the culture. Like for my firm, it's part of DEI it's embraced. It's built on the foundation of diversity. The firm is, and so I think in trying to do that, you do have to be ever cognizant of what's going on around you, of your people and what they're going through, what their backgrounds and experiences are. You have to, and then also putting teams together, right? It helps with putting teams together to get those different perspectives so that you get the best possible outcome, because the more information, the better. I mean, if we could go and collect data out in the public in general, we're going to come back with a better response or a better approach to an idea than if we just tried to do it in a vacuum. Same thing works internally, right? The more different data sets we can get involved, the better the result. So, I think that, I guess I want to also mention that it's very difficult to change a culture. So if you have an organization that's been around for a long time, then doing this is not easy. Right? Like it's not an easy task. It's not an overnight switch. It's something that you have to continuously work at, right? So you have to really embrace it. As a leader, you have to want to work on yourself internally, and you have to want to work to change that culture and put in the time, effort, and energy that it takes, and realize it's not a quick fix. And if you're going to do diversity right and reap the benefits of it, you have to put in the time. So.
Yeah, I mean, Michael, at APM, I mean, obviously you guys are invested, you're a large organization, you've got processes in place, you've got policies. Do you almost feel like it might be harder for small organizations to sort of implement and make a difference on DEI because they don't have the resources, or really it may be more difficult for them to have a good conversation about this without making, people feel really uncomfortable throughout the whole organization?
Yeah, I think, if you probably ask a leader of a small organization and a leader of a bigger one, they'd probably both say it's harder for each one of them, because, smaller organization might not have the resources that we're blessed to have at our size, but then you also have less people that maybe have differing opinions, or, less people that you need to bring along with you on the journey of DE&I. Whereas in a larger organization like ours, we've got over 3,500 people. So you've got 3,500 different backgrounds, different voices, different viewpoints on things, which causes its own opportunities. So for us, I think that one thing that our leadership has done that's really resonated with me is they've been vulnerable and they've asked for grace. They've acknowledged that it's going to be a journey. And I love that Mary made that comment about the grace is, they've come out and they've said, we might miss the mark sometimes. And we just want you to hold us accountable when we do and help us get better. If we're missing something, let us know, but also give us the grace to try to acknowledge it, fix it, because it's so many different components that go into this. And Mary said it a couple of times, it's not a microwavable solution. And so I think that's just one of the key things that's really resonated with me in how our leadership team, here has had some of the conversations.
Yeah, I mean, that's great to hear. I mean, unfortunately, we're almost up with our time. This is, a very important and very engaging subject. There is one last poll that we want people to take. It does involve leadership. Susan, if you want to show us that poll. So, while we're letting people take this poll, I mean, I think what's important as a takeaway is that, Mary loves saying this because it is absolutely true. There is no silver bullet. There is no one microwavable solution to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It differs on, your company. It differs on your people. It differs on your environment, where you happen to be, right? But I think the most important thing here is again, like Michael said, I mean, being open to this conversation, right? And that's what the California MBA is striving to do here, right? We want to open up this conversation to everybody, obviously not just people in the California MBA, but everybody to be open to considering these concepts of DE&I. And whether you're in leadership or not, I mean, I think that's another sort of point to make, right, Mary? I mean, there may be people within organizations that feel very strongly about D&I, but they are not leaders, right? I mean, in that sort of an aspect, I mean, what would you recommend to people that do want to bring this up with their own leadership?
Is that to me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm trying to get the question. So the question is, how should they approach the leadership?
Yes, how should they approach leadership if they do want to, have more of an emphasis, or they want to start a DEI program?
Okay, so I always say DEI is all about being intentional. And in order for you to actually be intentional, you're going to have that conversation regardless. So yes, you're going to have to take the courage and have that conversation with leadership. You can start with baby steps, right? Depending on how small or big your organization is. But there's so much, there's so many resources out there. You could do TED Talks just to begin. You have videos. And then we have submitted some information to the California MBA as well. So you're going to have resources that you can take a look at. And but education will be key to start internally. That way, as you expand that opportunity, you kind of have the foundation, as opposed to going external. People really can see it, especially when you're dealing with customers. Underrepresented communities are very sensitive to the fact that they want to be able to trust who they do business with. And so starting internally, getting the education and awareness first internally, and then you can go out as an organization to kind of look at the community and the markets that you're trying to embark on. But lots of free information on the internet right now. Yeah. And lots of resources from the California MBA.
Exactly, right? So I mean, this is the whole purpose of the California MBA forming this committee, allowing us this time to present to you. We have a website, as you can see, that has different resources located there. The Mortgage Bankers Association is very active in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you know, quite frankly, LinkedIn, along with TED Talks, just has a really big treasure trove of information, right? But free and paid for, right? But if you're looking to get started or you need help, you know, some advice on how to, you know, improve your existing DEI programs, you know, all that information is widely available. So with that, you know, I do want to thank Genail and Mary and Michael for joining me today. I think we had a very good discussion. We're very interested in continuing this discussion with you. We encourage you to engage with us here at the California MBA. Susan, are there any other last comments that you'd like to make?
Well, I just want to start off by saying that was a fantastic presentation. I know all of you worked really hard on this, and I thought we shared some really valuable information here today. Great way to kick off our webinar series for this committee. So thank all of you for, and we're getting a lot of compliments, by the way, in the chat. I did have one question that was posed, so if I may pose that to all of you. This might go to my two attorneys on the line, but there was a question that said, when you apply for a job, ethnicity is asked on the application to make sure they are meeting legal hiring requirements. With all the DEI awareness now, have you heard anything about these questions being removed from the hiring process?
I'm not the one with the JD.
John, you might be on mute.
Yeah, I was going to say, I haven't really heard anything about them taking those questions out, but when I've seen that question posed, it's usually not part of the general application. It's somewhere at the end, and it says that this information is not going to be included with your application itself, but they're only doing it so that they can track demographics. So that's what I've seen. I haven't, you know, I'm not an employment attorney, so I haven't spent much time looking at that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. That was, and that was the only question, again, other than just praise for the content that you all shared with us. So thank you for that. I want to wrap it up with a little bit of additional information for everyone to that I can share with you. So this is our membership month in May. Hopefully, you have not yet joined the California MBA. It's a great time to become a member. If you join by May 31st, you will get 2 complimentary conference registrations to any of our upcoming in-person events. Yes, you heard that correct, in person. We're going to be in person for our Western Secondary Market Conference happening in August at the beautiful Monarch Beach Resort in Dana Point, and our Western States CREF Commercial Real Estate Finance Conference happening at the Aria in Las Vegas, September 8th through the 10th. So if you join in May, you can also come to those events. Lastly, for you lenders out there, I want to make sure you're aware of our new launch. We launched mortgageinnovators.com after our conference earlier this month, which is now a year-round evergreen resource for all technology solutions in the mortgage space. So I encourage you to check out mortgageinnovators.com for all of your technology needs. That wraps up today's webinar. Thank you to Ian, as well as all of our panelists. Great content. Greatly appreciate what you shared with us today. Everyone have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.